Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, let me put our link in the chat. Right, there's that. If you'd like to catch up on anything or review anything, you can find it all there at our website. I hope everything's up. I might be wrong. There might be one or two classes missing still from the website, but hopefully those will be up soon enough. Okay, thank you for joining us. We are closing in on the end. Closing in on the end of the 10th chapter. Okay, and the goal of today is to try and finish the 10th chapter. So that will that's what we're going to go for today. We've been in the middle of this long discussion now for quite a few weeks. It started with a claim that King Solomon says about a divine chaos that seems to be evident in the world. All right, it shows up in the sense that good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. That's a piece of it. It happens it shows itself in the fact that people's very own downfall will show up in the thing that they've dedicated their lives to. Right? We saw the one who digs the pit will fall into it. The one who tears down the fence will be bitten by a snake. Right? So those were a couple of examples of that. And so this was a difficult question that he had. At the time, we said that the reason for this line of questioning is that King Solomon is willing to ask the question. He wants us to see that the way of a wise person is that they will ask a question, even if they don't have a satisfying answer. That being said, he does want to take on a little piece of it, and he wants to take on what would appear to me is that he wants to take on the ramifications of this philosophy. Okay, so there's a philosophy that the world is just chaotic. There's nothing to everything. You never know what's going to happen. Danger is behind every corner, and therefore he argued for a minute there that he wanted to argue that there's no point in preparation and preparing yourself for things, in safety, in any of those things, because the world's just going to go on its way, and it's not waiting for you, basically, to be safe. It's going to continue on its way. And so in that case, it's interesting. It's a multifaceted philosophy. From a religious perspective, it would say, oh, you know what? Perhaps there's a God, perhaps there isn't, but definitely the world itself is chaotic. Or it could just be a way of approaching life, that why should I put in so much effort? We never know. Who knows? It's all based on luck, or it's all based on coincidence or anything like that. So he wants to approach this, and he's been taking a very slow, deliberate way to do this approach to this question. And so what we saw was that he got this conversation, or this comparison, this contrast between the wise person and the two forms of fools. Okay, you've got the sachal, who's not really much of a fool at all, is actually a very smart person, is the cynic, the powerful cynic who's able to twist everything on its head, turn the world upside down. And then you've got the other type of fool, who's the kasil, the student of the cynic, the one who parrots the words of this other bad guy, if you will, but doesn't really have any substance of their own. They know what's right to say at the right time and to sound smart, but they don't actually have anything of their own. And these were two adversaries to wisdom. And then he says an interesting thing, which is what we got into last week. Let's go into the verse, because we didn't get very far with it. Okay. So he talked about this contrast between two different lands. There's the land that has a foolish or a childish king, and whose officers don't care about other people. They put their needs before other people. And it says there's another land, a land that's run by people who have power, but they are also invested in making sure that things go well. They're not kings in the same way that they are noble people, noblemen, and that for that reason they are invested in making sure that things go well. So that was kind of a part of this contrast of the two forces. You've got wisdom, which puts, or benevolent rulers at least, who put the needs of others before theirs, who are invested in their work. And then you've got, on the other hand, you've got the whose king is a fool, is a child. You've got the privileged youth who end up being the parrots who give over the other people's ideas but don't really know what they're talking about. And that led us to this interesting verse over here. This is verse number 18. Okay, we began the verse last week. I don't think we got very far with it. And he says like this. So in other words, we'll start with this verse this week. Ba'etzaltayim yimach hamikaret. In laziness, the roof caves in. Okay, we'll discuss the wording in a minute. Uvshiflut yadayim yidlof habayit. And with the lowliness of hands, the house leaks. Okay. Once again, ba'etzaltayim yimach hamikaret. With laziness, the roof will cave in. Uvshiflut yadayim yidlof habayit. And with the lowered hands, the house leaks. Okay, so there's a number of words, very atypical wording that we have in the verse over here. This is basically practically every word in this verse is an uncommon verb or noun. Not uncommon, not that they're grammatically strange, but they're just not common words. Okay, the first one, this is an important one, is atzel. Ayin tzadi lamed would be the shorish of this word over here. Atzel means lazy. Okay, it doesn't show up that often throughout Tanakh. One of the probably most famous places it shows up is in our very author's other book, in King Solomon's book Mishlei or Proverbs. He says a very famous idea that the lazy person should go and watch an ant, because ants go and they collect incredible amounts of food that they'll never get a chance to eat. But they are always prepared, you know. So it's his reprimanding that he does, his musar, his rebuke that he gives to the lazy person. So there also is another place where you find atzel meaning lazy. So that's just an interesting word. It's laziness in this case. It's not a lazy person; it's laziness. So with laziness, atzaltayim. With laziness, the roof caves in. Bikareh is the roof. Trying to think where. The other place that I think of is in Tehillim, in Psalms, chapter 104. It says, "Hamikareh b'mayim aliyotov," that God creates a roof of water over the world. So the upper levels of the world are a roof of water. Okay, so mikareh is a roof. Again, I'm trying to figure out where else we find that. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. It is a roof. Okay. And then the final part of that is yimach, which is an interesting word itself. In the Torah, it's actually used to refer to somebody who is poor, who's physically, or monetarily poor, economically poor. So imachu me'arkecha is if a person's personal value devalues. It has to do with the laws of persons selling themselves as a slave. They run out of money, so they sell themselves as a slave to a fellow Jew. And the laws pertain to that. So it actually means to deteriorate or to cave in. And that actually fits over here better than it does over there, I would say. So let me put it this way, in another sense, mach, this mem chaf, also denotes softness. Okay, mochin in the Talmudic terminology is anything soft that they would use for insulation, for example, or for a pillow or anything like that is referred to as mochin. So in this sense, it would be something that should be solid. is suddenly turned soft and crumbles. Okay, so ba'atzal tayim yimachem ikareh, due to laziness, the roof caves in. Uv'shiflut yadayim, so shafel means low down, lowly. I feel like we've had it before here, but it is a pretty common shoresh, pretty common root. Or I mean, not very common, but it does show up every once in a while. Shafel means low. So in the sense, the lowliness of hands is hands that always stay by the side, right? They don't lift up to help; they stay down here, low neck, by your waist. They're not raised up to help. Thinking about the parable. So somebody's working on the roof. If their hands are by their side and not raised up to the roof, well, they're never going to fix anything. So lowly hands cause gidlof, which is leaking. A very, very rare root word, shoresh, delaf. To this day, I believe it's still used as a leak in even modern Hebrew. I'd have to look that up for sure. It definitely shows up in Talmud, in Talmudic literature, as referring to a leak. So in other words, the house is leaking because of lowly hands. Okay, so we've got this verse over here. It tells us, seemingly out of context, that listen, the roof caves in because of laziness, and the house is leaking because people's hands are kept low instead of high at work. Well, what's the purpose of this verse over here? We may have touched on this at the very end of last week. I might have said it too quickly, but I think the idea over here is a very important idea. The world is chaotic. Okay, let's say the world is just a place of chaos. There's no rhyme or reason why anything happens. No matter what amount of work a person puts into the world, they're always in danger. You never know what's around every corner. Okay, let's say that happens. Let's say that's the case. Take a second and look at a closer example, an example that's close to home, right? If a person is sitting in their house and suddenly the roof starts leaking, and so they've seen that over there. They've seen the bubble forming in the roof, in the ceiling for a little bit. They've seen the cracks. They know that there's something. There's they need to re-roof their house or something like that. Well, they say, oh look, the roof is caving in, and it must be just the chaos of the world. No, that's a foolish approach to it. When your roof is leaking, I keep on trying to say roof is leaking. When your roof is leaking, it's for a very simple reason. You're not taking care of it, right? Yes, there's hail damage and all those things, but in the end of the day, it's a fixable thing that you could do something about. There's only one thing that stops the roof there's only one thing that is causing the roof to really leak, and that's laziness. In other words, you could look at the same roof and say, listen, that's just my luck. My luck is my roof is leaking. Or you could say, oh no, I have something here that I could do something about. The difference between the two ways of approaching it is how impactful laziness is in the person's life. So if laziness takes over their life, they're going to have a leaking roof. They're going to have, or a caved-in roof and a leaking house, as he puts it over here. Meaning that in the end of the day, when somebody wants to go ahead and say, or when somebody uses this philosophy and says, well, there's nothing I can do about my life anyway, it is what it is. There's really only one motivation, or one of a few motivations. But a major motivation for that is laziness. When a person is avoiding responsibility, they could claim a theoretical reason of, oh, well, the world is chaotic anyway. There's no point in my doing anything anyway. That you could claim that, but you, me, and everybody else really knows that there's different motivation behind it. It's not because you have this theory of how the world works. It's because of the fact that the person in the story is a lazy person that is not really interested in taking care of their problems. In general, when a person has a problem in their life and they don't want to take care of it, they will find any excuse to avoid it. I think about issues of mental health, for example, people who have things that they have to work through, or relationships, right? People that you have relationships that you have to work through, people that you haven't spoken to in a long time, or family that you've been disconnected with, or so in those situations, you will do anything. A person will do anything they can to avoid those situations at all costs, right? And unfortunately, it's very common because it's easier in our mind. We convince ourselves that it's easier to deal with the ramifications, to deal with the fallout, than to deal with the actual problem. So a certain level of laziness, or perhaps disinterest in putting in this work, causes other things to happen, and the ramifications end up being much greater. I think I mentioned before that I had a relative who, elderly relative, who at the nearing the end of his life, he had one cousin left, just two older men. There was basically their entire generation left in their family, and they got into some silly fight, as people do, and for the last 10 years of their lives, they didn't talk to each other. And there's a relatively easy fix. It might be hard at the time, going through and working out the problem and maybe having a little patience and things like that. But no, I'm stuck in. He should come to me, or any other excuse that people come up with. In the end of the day, it's because we don't want to put in the work to fix those things. So underneath everything ends up being this laziness. So we could say, the world is chaotic. Okay, you may believe that, or you may convince yourself that you believe that. But in reality, it comes from a bigger issue. And that issue is a laziness. A person doesn't want to fix the roof. Well, the roof's going to cave in. The ramifications end up being bigger. The negative ramifications end up being much larger than the work ever was. Hire a roofer. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of work. You're right. It's even more work to deal with a caved-in roof and all your possessions lost in a flood. Right? That's a much bigger problem. So in general, this ends up being an issue that we face, is convincing ourselves. The amount of work that we go to convince ourselves to be lazy. It's a lot of work. The things we have to work around just to maintain our laziness. Okay, that's this verse over here. We already touched on it last week, so that's kind of a repetition of that, or finishing off that idea. So let's move on to verse number 19. And my understanding is that this is a continuation of the previous verse. We just said that there is this issue, this fundamental or underlying issue of laziness that affects a person, and that's what gets in the way of them ever doing the work that they need to do to have a better situation, to have a better lifestyle, I would say. So on that subject, he says, "Lischok usim lechem." To happiness, or to laughter, to laughter they make bread. V'yayin yisamach chaim, and wine is the joy of life. V'hakesef ya'aneh et hakol, and the money or the silver will answer everything. Okay, let's read that one more time. Lischok osim lechem, to laughter they make bread. V'yayin yisamach chaim, and wine will, I guess there's two ways to read this. It's either the happiness of life is wine, or wine will make life happy. Okay, let's go with that second one. Wine will make life happy. V'hakesef ya'aneh et hakol, and silver or money, see, it's interchangeable. Silver answers everything, or will answer everything. Okay, so this is a very interesting verse. I mean, this last phrase over here, v'hakesef ya'aneh et hakol, is a very common, just in the vernacular, it's a phrase that we'll use a lot. Oh, kesef ya'aneh et hakol, right? Everything is answered with money. Obviously, being said sarcastically. There are a lot of problems that can be answered with money, but not all of them. Somebody once told me, actually Rabbi Spivak, if you know Rabbi Spivak, he once told me that somebody told him that problems that can be answered with money are good problems to have. It's when a problem can't be answered with money that it's a worse problem. There's always there's a way to get money. When things, sickness and things like that, that's when it's a bigger issue. So anyway, he's saying over here that money answers everything. All right, so if you want to walk away from the class this week, the answer, the one lesson, package lesson is that money answers all problems, right? Obviously not. So we have to understand what that means. Okay, I think there's a number of interesting things over here. You can, as you can see, the verse is really divided into three parts. There's the first three words, second three words, and third, and the last group of four words. I think it's interesting. You look at this and look at the tenses over here. L'schok osim lechem. It doesn't say osim lechem b'schok, that they make bread with laughter. It says that to laughter they make bread. Okay. Now, does that mean for the purpose of laughter they make bread? I think that'd be a very strange thing to say. I'm not even sure what that would mean. I think what he is trying to say over here, lechem is bread, but it's the staple. It's a staple of existence. So to the lazy person, laughter becomes a staple. It becomes a necessary part of life. Now, laughter is a necessary part of life. I'll put it that way. Laughter is an essential part of our existence, joy and laughter. However, the lazy person is going to put laughter at the forefront of everything else. In the same way we had the king or the officers who eat their breakfast before taking care of the needs of people, which was a bad thing. He was saying that's the woe to the country that has leaders who put their own breakfast first, their own selfish needs first. So in the same way, we have a similar thing over here. If somebody makes laughter the most essential part of their existence, if they turn laughter into bread, there's something wrong there. There's something, there's a problem. And he is saying that problem stems from a laziness, right? And this is not a judgment of any sort. Late night television, right? After a long day of work, what is it? You sit down on the couch and it's comedy. That's all the late night comics. Again, that's not a judgment on late night comedy. I'm just making a connection over here that when you want to be lazy, when you want to kind of relax at the end of the day, comedy ends up being the place to go. The problem ends up being, again, if you make laughter into the priority. So when we say l'schok osim lechem, they turn laughter into the priority. Okay, so that's the problem with one of the issues that arises for the lazy person, is that laughter becomes a priority for the person. And wine is the joy of life. Okay, yain yisamachaim, wine becomes the happiness of life. So that's an interesting contrast, because we just said their whole purpose turns into finding laughter. Okay, but then you find that there's a strange relationship. How do I get to laughter? Well, only through wine. Only wine will make life enjoyable. When laughter becomes the sole purpose of life, so then it gets much harder to find it. You need a chemical intervention to get there. So wine is what's going to give life its joy. It's an interesting contrast that the thing that the person has decided to dedicate themselves to, it becomes much harder to reach. I heard this recently, actually. I heard this on the radio a couple weeks ago. I think it was George Orwell who said something to the effect of those who make their life about happiness have a very hard time finding happiness. And those who make their lives about taking care of their responsibilities find happiness easily. Something to that effect. I would have to look up the exact quote. But what ends up being is, if a person is motivated through laziness to just sit back and relax and laugh and just enjoy and not take care of their responsibilities, that same joy will become much harder to find. They're gonna have to turn towards some sort of intervention. In this case, he's saying a chemical intervention of wine. There's a religious group of Jews that I believe, and I think most rabbis and most people would probably believe, are a little misled in their service of God. There's a group of Jews who believe that there's nothing more important to life than happiness. Okay, that's a debatable point. How important happiness is how does it rank? But there's a group of Jews who, again, this is, they say happiness is the only important thing. There's nothing else to life besides for happiness. And they will go ahead and do, based on that philosophy, they will go ahead and they'll do drugs. They'll drink to excess. They do whatever they can because they've decided that happiness is the only purpose of life. They'll take MDMA, ecstasy, party drugs, and things like that, just in order to achieve happiness. So this is, I think, clearly a wrong philosophy. When happiness becomes the main point, when it becomes bread, well, then suddenly you need wine. When happiness is the bread, you need wine to enjoy life. Okay, and again, he's saying that that's motivated by laziness. It's motivated by this need to, or this desire to not take care of our own things, to not fix the roof as it's starting to cave in. So that same person is also going to look for laughter wherever they can. They're going to need help to find happiness when they need it, when they want it. Okay, what does this have to do with what we've been talking about? Well, going back to, again, our original question of what is the world, a world of chaos? And if it's a world of chaos, why do I bother with anything that I bother? Why do I put in all the work that I put in? It's all going to fall apart anyway, or it might be successful anyway. I have no way of knowing, right? Why put in work? In other words, this theoretical question ends up being a practical question of why should I put in all the work that I put in? The world is just, it's chaotic anyway. Why should I try? Why should I put an effort? And so the answer to why should I put an effort is what's motivating the question. He doesn't answer the question. He says, what's motivating the question? It's one of three things. It's either a cynical way of looking at the world, the sachal, again, that person that we mentioned at the beginning, the cynic who wants to tear down the social structures and to take everything and say everything is worthless. Okay, or it could be the kasil, the person who is drank the Kool-Aid of the other guy and made sure and will parrot anything else. And they're saying, oh, the world's just chaotic anyway, so why should I bother? The what we call it before is the faux intellectual, the fake intellectual who doesn't actually know what they're saying, but parrots the words of others. Or it's motivated by laziness. It's motivated by a lack of desire to actually take care of things, to actually take care of the person's problems. So if a person is saying, I don't feel that, I feel like we shouldn't bother with fixing anything in the world. Okay, well, that person, again, is either motivated by one of these three things. He's either motivated by cynicism, by a lack of intellectualism or a fake intellectualism, or is motivated by laziness. That's kind of the three things. This whole long conversation is boiled down to these three things. That is the motivation to the question. It's kind of like we could look at things going on in the world, and we could look at it both different ways. We could say, oh, that's a really tough problem. I don't know how to deal with that, right? Let's say, something's going on in the world, and you say, I don't know what to do about that. But a person should care. A person should have a care about what's going on in the world. I think that's part of what he's saying over here is that we shouldn't just say, oh, well, the world is all chaos anyway. Don't even bother taking care of it. On the contrary, we should be involved with things that are going on in the world. Now we can argue about what things need to be taken care of in the world. That's its own lasting argument that we'll go through forever about what things do need to be taken care of. But there are things that need to be taken care of, and we can all agree that there are things to be taken care of. The sign of a wise person, again, that's the goal of all of this, is to figure out how to access wisdom. The sign of the wise person is that they're going to be at least showing a level of care. Whether they can or cannot do anything, that's a different question. They might be able to, and they don't chip in, which would be laziness, or they might not be able to, in which case they can perhaps chip in other ways. But there's definitely something, a concern should exist for a person. Okay? It's interesting that he ends off with this idea or this thought with kesef ya'aneh hakol, that silver or money answers everything. And I think there's an important idea that's being expressed over there. Typically, I would say most people understand that that line is saying that it is being stated with a certain level of he doesn't really mean it. He's saying it sarcastically, that money answers everything. I would say that's probably how most people read the verse. I think there's another possible answer for that. When you have somebody who is lazy, okay, or even the cynic, or any of these other people that we've talked about, particularly the lazy person. If you have a lazy person, they lose their ability to the lazy person loses their ability to judge things subjectively, because they are motivated by their own reasons. They want to remain lazy. They want to avoid work. They want to avoid their connection to their responsibilities. So if a person's avoiding their responsibilities, they lose their ability to be subjective over something, because they have a bias. They're trying to they really want to avoid what they're doing. So when a person is coming back, when a person is trying to move away from that, if I am trying to move away from laziness, how am I going to measure the reality of things? How am I going to measure things if my subjective reality is off? If my way of measuring truth is off, how am I going to be able to overcome my laziness? And to that, he says, there's actually a metric for that. There's a metric to importance, to what is actually important in life. And in some senses, that's just money. Let's see that in two different ways. When a person, what do people spend money on? I think that's the first thing. If you're curious about what it is that is important in life, what things are actually important in life, then part of that question is going to be, what do people spend money on? Now, that's not a great metric system, I guess, as to what people spend money on, because if people have money, they'll spend a lot of money. But let's look at it from a different perspective. What happens when people don't have money? What do they spend their money on? Well, when people don't have money, they're not going on cruises. When people don't have money, they're not buying the fanciest food or things like that, or the fanciest clothing or fast cars or anything like that. When people don't have money, we start to see what actually matters to people. We start to see we are taken out of the subjective decision about how to spend my time, and instead we get to see the objective. We get to see what's actually important to people. Right now we're going through a time where everyone's kind of had to tighten their belts a little bit. 2023, we're going through a period of pretty heavy inflation, and it's calmed down perhaps a little bit, but it hasn't really gotten that much better yet. It hasn't reversed, that's for sure. And it continues to go up. And there's talk about what happens if there's a recession or all sorts of things like that. This is an interesting time for somebody who is interested in wisdom. It's going to be fascinating to watch and to inspect the world surrounding us and see, how do people's habits change over the next couple of years? That will help us determine what things are actually important in life. Okay, it might happen, God forbid it will happen with ourselves, but it might happen with ourselves that we'll have to figure out how to spend our own money more wisely. I mean, look at that. There's the word, wisely. When people have to spend their money wisely, that's when you start to see what's actually important in life. Spending time with family, or with loved ones of any sort, or bare necessities and things like that. That's how a person would overcome the issue that laziness shows. Laziness creates this inability to measure things subjectively. Money will answer that question. So in that sense, money does answer a question, quite literally answers a question. What is important in life? Look what happens when money is tight, and that will answer what's important in life. There's another, I'll leave it at that for that idea. Okay. So with all that being said, we have kind of the answer to our question, or part of an answer to the question. The question again being, if the world is chaotic, why should I put in effort? And his response to that is, what's making you ask that question? It's a very good Jewish answer. He's answering a question with a question, right? The question is not, if you like that, the answer is not, he doesn't have a fluid, solid answer to it, but why do you ask the question? What's motivating a person to ask this question? Why doesn't the person want to put in the effort? Well, it's for a number of different reasons. Either they don't believe in society at all. They're the cynic who doesn't believe in the social fabric that we have, or there's some deluded type of student or something that's parroting the words of others, or they're just lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to put in the effort in life. So instead, we're stuck with the question of, so, all right, but for the wise person, what really, I have to put in my work. Okay, so what does that mean? What does putting in the effort mean? What does putting in the work mean? And that leads us to the last verse over here, which we're only going to get, I don't think we're going to get past translating the words. It's a pretty long verse, and I have to make it a little smaller. Oops, because I can't get it all on the page. It's one of our longer verses. Okay, but this is the last verse of chapter 10. And he goes into what he's done a number of times where you could almost tell when he's switching from theoretical to practical, because he goes into that first person. You should do such and such. That's usually one of his signs that he wants you to take this piece to heart. He's actually going to go with this for a while. As we keep on saying, the chapters are not divided how I would divide them. They're divided by Christian monks, right? At some point in some part of the medieval history, right? This verse could be part of the next chapter, or the whole next chapter could be part of this chapter, whatever it is. This is part of the answer of how a person should behave. And he says, Gam b'madacha melech al tekalel. Even in your thinking, in your mind, you should not curse the king. Uvchadre mishkavecha, and in the bedrooms, the rooms where you lie down, al tekalel ashir, do not curse the wealthy person. Ki of hashamayim yolich et hakol, because the bird of the heaven will carry the voice. Uval kinafayim yaged davar, and the winged one, in other words, another term for a bird, a poetic term for a bird. Yaged davar will tell over the matter. Okay, so again, gam b'mada'acha melech al tekalel. In your mind, don't curse the king. And do not curse the wealthy person in your bedroom, because the bird of heaven, will carry the voice, and the winged one will tell over the matter. Right? This is the source for the phrase that we have. A little birdie told me. Okay, this is literally the source of that phrase, because a bird will go and tell people what's going on. The sages also over here in the midrash, they say a very interesting phrase. They say yesh oznayim lakotel. The walls have ears. Literally, they say that in Hebrew. Yesh oznayim lakotel. They are ears to the wall. Now, I don't know if that means that the walls themselves have ears, or there are literally people with their ears pressed up against the wall. That might be probably a more likely translation for that phrase. But what we have over here is the fact that the person should be very careful, not only with how they think, or not only with how they speak, but even with how they think, or how they compose themselves, even in privacy, because there is a lot of things. Things that you don't think can get out will actually get out. We've learned this a lot in the past decade or so with Twitter. Isn't that interesting how Twitter is a bird, and here we have the little bird that goes and tells things. How many great, powerful people have been brought down by Twitter, by a hashtag in the past decade? It's pretty interesting. So we don't have time to get into that right now, but here's the beginning of the wise person's response to the world is chaotic. There's no point to any effort. He says, actually, there's a lot of point to a lot of things. And the first thing is prevention, is making sure that you're protected, is making sure that you are safe, and you are careful. Safety and care is a very important thing. It starts with care about what you think and what you say, because it's very possible that something could be tweeted about at some point later. So we don't have time to continue with this right now, but we will, God willing, pick up again next week. Here we are back in the main section over here. Thank you for joining us. We'll, again, God willing, we'll pick up next week, and I look forward to seeing you.